Now, please have your book also along with you. Today, we are going to see Robert Browning's dramatic monologue. Yesterday, we have had an introduction of dramatic monologue. In today's class, we will know about Robert Browning's dramatic monologue, which is a form that we have come across in yesterday's class. Robert Browning, who is a dramatist and who is also philosophical in nature, is a metaphysical poet. He is best known for his mastery of the dramatic language. If anybody would ask, who is the one that is named for dramatic monologue, one would easily say it is Robert Browning. He was also a master of the dramatic poem. He was one of the most ambitious and well-regarded playwrights of the English dramatic monologues. In his epic works of fiction, Men and Women, featuring 50 theatrical monologues, were written in blank verse. They had dialogues, men and women. The moral dilemma he expresses in his speech is especially the figure of speech metaphor, in order to show the struggles that actually the characters in his poems face throughout the play. To know about the human mind and heart of the human being, he particularly chose to show to us the human mind and heart through his works such as My Last Duchess, which we'll be seeing soon, My Last Duchess, Rabbi Ben Ezra, Andrea del Sarto, Fra Lippo Lippi, Fra Lippo Lippi, A Grammarian's Funeral, and one more is there, Porphyria's Lover. These works show his ideal medium. Now, coming to know what dramatic monologue is, in the words of M.H. Abrams, who is a well-known American critic who is recognized for his work on Romanticism, he identifies 3 characteristics of the dramatic monologue in poetry. Let's know what are they. This individual, who is not clearly the poet, gives the speech that constitutes the entire poem at a vital juncture. That means there will be one individual. This individual, he need not be the poet, but then he gives the speech in such a manner that will give the gist of the entire poem at a vital juncture. The next thing is that there are signs or some sort of signals or symbols, we can say signs, in the single speaker's discourse, in the single speaker's speech, that the auditors or the audience are present and what they say or do, but we do not know who they are or what they are doing. And then the third thing is that the basic idea which guides the poet's selection and construction of the lyric speaker's words is to convey to the reader the speaker's temperament and also the character in such a way that it creates or arouses interest in the audience. The dramatic monologue, which was popular throughout the Victorian period, was thought to have been perfected by Robert Browning. So the actual way that it has been shown or performed on the stage is done by or portrayed by Robert Browning. These writers, as well as, particularly Robert Browning, as well as other writers such as Alfred Lord, like yesterday we have seen one author, Alfred Lord Tennyson, and then Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Then we have Matthew Arnold. All these writers, and apart from that, there is one more, Christina Rossetti, and then Charles Swinburne. Such writers also wrote dramatic monologues. There were others who wrote dramatic monologues, but no one else has created as many as powerful ones similar to Robert Browning's works. There is nobody else who was as perfect as Robert Browning. My Last Duchess by Robert Browning is a well known example of dramatic monologue. When Robert Browning initially published this work in Italy, published his work called Italy, he was using the title My Last Duchess. In the year 1849, it was given its name by a member of British Royal Navy. There was another classic poem from the dramatic romance. It was published with this title, The Last Ride Together, which was also included with The Pied Piper of Hamelin, published in the year 1845. Dramatic monologue. Browning wrote about the death of a beloved family member in this poem, My Last Duchess. Many people mistakenly see Tennyson's Ulysses as another dramatic monologue, in spite of the fact that Tennyson's poem lacks the conversational tone of Browning's poetry. You have observed in previous class that we have discussed Ulysses, which was written by Tennyson. But then that dramatic monologue had missed the conversational tone. In the poem My Last Duchess, Robert Browning portrays or else exhibits the conversational tone of Browning's poetry. Now let's look into the summary part. The Duke of Ferrara is the poet's narrator. So the narrator is the Duke of Ferrara. The court's representative comes to the Duke to discuss the marriage of the Count's daughter. He addresses the envoy of the Count. The Duke is a widower, which shows that he lost his wife recently. And then he opens up to the ambassador about his love, about his connection with his first wife. So he is telling all about his wife, who he lost. The envoy will be impressed if he can demonstrate to the ambassador that he is an avid supporter of the arts. This is how the poem portrays the incident. Browning very brilliantly conveys the Duke's conceitedness in the poem. The poem is just in 56 lines. It's a very brief poem, but the treatment is more concentrated. It's important to note that the poem makes extensive use of spoken phrase, or as we can say, simple colloquial language. Browning's success as a poet lies in his ability to introduce a conversational tone into his work. Note that Browning anticipated many of the current trends in poetry, such as Eliot's work also in the same way. Now, going back to the story. When an envoy from a count arrives with a marriage proposal, the Duke of Ferrara welcomes him with open arms. So the envoy from a count comes to the Duke to bring a marriage proposal. The Duke of Ferrara welcomes him grandly with open arms. This Duke proudly displays a painting of his ex-wife. There's a painting of his ex-wife who died, who he killed. He proudly shows that painting, which was drawn by a very well-known friar, artist Friar Pandolf. That is the name of the painter, Friar Pandolf. In his words, it's impossible to think that his wife is no longer in that painting. It's looking, or the painting is looking like as if it has life in it. So excellent it is, so wonderful it is. It looks as if it's not a painting, but there is real life in that painting. The portrait has such a liveliness in it that the Duke was completely enthralled, shocked. The depth and intensity in these looks puzzles him, surprises him. Can anyone else see it? He asks. He is so possessive in his nature that his love for his wife would be only for himself, and the smiles or else the lifefulness would be seen or should be seen only by him, not anybody else. Then how could it be so possible that an artist or a painter, the one whose name is Friar Pandolf, had drawn the painting with such a life filled in it? How is it possible? How did he make the painting so enlivening? After that, the Duke draws the envoy's attention to a particular expression on her face. There's a flush, like when one is happy, there's a blush seen in the face, the redness appears. So that blush is seen in the painting also. A flush, or as we can say blush, the redness, which comes out of happiness. It wasn't just the Duchess' excitement that made her blush. He says, as he comments on it, "My darling sir, my dear sir." Any kind of compliment would make her smile. Anybody would say or give a compliment to her, she would smile. She is such a nice lady that she gives her response by smiling. No matter who said it, anybody would tell. It can be a servant, it can be anyone, it can be her husband or a friend or anybody as such. She doesn't mind. But then whoever talks to her would see a smile in her face. That smile also could be seen with a lifefulness, which is seen in the painting too. Paint and brush can never be expected to capture or duplicate the kind of half flush of emotion that goes along with you, perhaps, the painter would observe. "My dear lady," he says, "my dear lady, your mantle covers the wrist too much." She considered this kind of behavior to be courteous to her, and her cheeks were flushed with red roses at the time. Whoever gives a compliment to her, she would smile. When she smiles, there is a flush in her face. She takes everything, like in a happy tone, and that happiness in her face. She has a heart that is eager to be gladdened and influenced by others. Such a wonderful heart. Such a nice lady she is. The Duke claims that she upset him, she troubled him. He is not happy. Why? Because of this quality that she has. What's the quality that she possesses? Smiling, laughing, or else we can say anybody would give her any compliment, she feels so happy, and that happiness could be seen as a flush in her face. A nice smile, a good smile, a pleasing smile, which actually influences others. He didn't like it, so he was upset. She has upset him. That is, even a cheap gift from him or a little present of fruits from someone else also would make her happy. Look at this. And they make her happy, as would the things like the setting of the sun with an orange glow, or riding a animal like horse or a dog, whatever. Looking at the sun setting, or else a red rose, or somebody would give her fruits or some gift to her. she would smile, smile with happiness, which actually had upset the king, or it's the duke. Duke and Duchess, these are the two characters. The entire dialogues are spoken by the Duke itself. Even though she praised him as if he had given her an equal present, the Duke laments that she didn't appreciate the magnitude of Duke's 900-year ancestry. See, there should be some difference between husband's gift and somebody else's gift. But then she accepted all those with an equalness, with an equality. The magnitude is one and the same, whether it is her husband celebrating 900 years of ancestry, or anybody giving her fruits, or it's the setting of the sun, all are equal for her. Of course, he could have taught her all this. He could have taught her, no, you shouldn't smile like this, you shouldn't do like this, you shouldn't respond to anybody like this. He could have taught to her. But the fact is, though, that he didn't like to do it because it would be to descend or else come down his power. Now he is continuing. He is telling all this to the one that is the count who has come to discuss the count's daughter's marriage with the duke. The duke's wife, Duchess, is no more, and the count has come there in order to give his daughter's hand to the duke. Then now here the duke is continuing. He says, whenever I passed her, she smiled. Whenever I passed her, she smiled at me. But she smiled like that whenever any fellow passed by. Look at this. Even if a servant walks in the same path, or else a maid comes in the same path, husband, that is the duke, passes the same path. It is one and the same for her. I mean to say, she accepts everybody on the humanitarian goods. There is nothing more beautiful or else like beauty than this quality. Of course, husband is special, no doubt about it. But then see, he's not able to tolerate that happiness when she comes across anybody else and gives her smiles. He was not able to take it. This cycle continued. Then the Duke decided that he issues commands, and all the smiles stopped. When do the smiles of a person stop? When the person is no more, is killed. He or she is killed. So here the lines tell us that he ordered somebody to kill the Duchess. Here ends the character of the Duchess. Now, the Duke then refers to the marriage proposal made by the ambassador. The Count's daughter is his primary purpose. So he has to get somebody to marry him. So he is ready to take in hand the daughter of the Count. Not anything else. He does not want dowry or anything else in a greater degree. He knows the Count's generosity. He says, I know the Count's generosity. Your master, in this respect, he continues. And then he shows a statue which is made of bronze, and that statue is the statue of Neptune. This statue of Neptune conquers 7 horses. That statue is shown by the Duke to this Count. He says, this was made especially for me in the Austrian city of Innsbruck, which is a rare piece of art. Intentionally, he is conveying that this kind of thing will not be there anywhere else. It's specially made only for him. The poem depicts this scenario. In a scene, the Duke had a dialogue. I mean to say his monologue is there. It's a self-portrait describing about himself, his own self. The more we learn about him, the more we see that he is an arrogant person and conceited personality. conceited. There is a guise in him. There is a different person inside him, as well as his severity towards his first wife. It's good to say that My Last Duchess is one of Browning's most popular pieces of art or work, we should say. It has all the hallmarks of Browning's style as a poet. It's important to remember that this is a theatrical monologue. This, in fact, has popularized Browning. A theatrical monologue is different from a soliloquy in that it is a longer speech by the speaker. Instead of speaking to an audience, the speaker in a soliloquy converses or talks to himself in a theatrical monologue. That is the difference. He addresses the audience directly with his thoughts. What are all there inside him? All those are expressed. The speaker in this poetry is the Duke, and the listener is the envoy. The audience member is a passive participant. We all have to just watch the show. But the audience reactions to the Duke's speech will be reflected in the Duke's monologue itself. As a result, the poem has such an amount of drama. We can have a sight of it by the Duke's abrupt voice as it changes. As a result, a dramatic monologue is what we call it, a drama and a dialogue. A dialogue in the sense is narration. Is monologue, only one speaker. That is why it is monologue. It's worth calling that most of Browning's poems are written in that format. The poem has a strong emotional impact because it's the way that the characters are depicted in it. The character of the Duke is the poem's second noteworthy feature. It's important to observe how this speech of the Duke reveals just a sliver of his personality. We can tell he is arrogant because he is arrogant, yes. He is ecstatic because a world-renowned artist painted the portrait of his wife. He is ecstatic, so happy, extremely happy. But then he takes at the same time the pride of his 900-year family history. There is ancestral history. He enjoys talking about his family history. Aside from that, he brags that the Neptune statue was specially made for him. He's so self-centered, I mean to say, talk about himself, boast about himself, that he does not give a damn or care about how other people feel. He is a cold-blooded killer who was enraged by his wife's willingness to be upfront with him. We might infer from his comments that she was named, very soft and courteous, very pleasant by nature itself. From the words of the Duke itself, we can understand this. The haughty Duke, on the other hand, could not tolerate this quality. The thought that she didn't value his position is found in his words. He talks in such a manner that the audience or we as readers would understand that she is not caring for him. It was possible to teach her to appreciate his value. He could have done that. No, you shouldn't do like this. You should be like this. There could have been something like this, but then he didn't do that. But he refused to educate her. Instead, he simply issues orders and stopped her smiles forever. We come to terms with the Duke's vengeful nature. One order from him erased her smiles completely. The entire past of joy is gone. And he's ecstatic about it, happy about it. He's telling all this to the Count, that is the envoy, the ambassador. The Duke is a thief. He insists that the bride is the most important criterion in a marriage. He says, I do not want any dowry. It's only the Count's daughter that I want. He makes it very clear that he wants a sizable dowry from the count. What is that sizable dowry? Only the girl or the bride. As a result, the Duke comes across as conceited. We cannot use the word thief anyhow. Conceited. What exactly he is still not known. Externally, he looks different. Internally, through this poem, we come to know what type of personality he is. He is self-centered. He is cold-hearted. The important thing to keep in mind is that Browning has done an excellent job of conveying his feeling in a limited amount of space, in large part due to his use of this dramatic form called dramatic monologue. We only hear from a single character in Browning's dramatic monologues. For example, let's look into the poem only to give you as an example, Andrea del Sarto, the speaker, a sole speaker, because that is also the dramatic monologue. The sole speaker, Andrea, is joined by Lucrezia, the listener. There is one silent listener in the poem, My Last Duchess, which is a 16th century Italian nobleman named Duke. The emissary is there to discuss his second marriage with the Count's daughter. In the poem Fra Lippo Lippi, it contains a dialogue between Lippo and a number of watchmen. When the grammarian dies, one of his disciples addresses the other mourners in a grammarian's funeral. There is only one speaker in all these poems, and he is a serious predicament. These are not the words of Robert Browning, but rather those of somebody else. They are just like Hamlet or Macbeth in that they are romantic figures, but not the central figures in Shakespeare. In Browning's dramatic monologues, the abrupt and startling ends, shocking, surprising endings are a recurring theme. With a suddenness or its dramatic suddenness, My Last Duchess, the poem My Last Duchess begins. He says the very first lines, that's my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. Look there. So these lines show that he is showing a painting which looks as if it is full of life. Even in the poem Andrea del Sarto, it has a dramatic beginning very clearly. He says, but do not let us quarrel any more. No, my Lucrezia, bear with me for once. Here, Andrea directly addresses his wife and wants a compromise. He seeks a compromise. In the poem Fra Lippo Lippi, on the other hand, there's a direct threatening a watchman saying that he will be hanged for his rude behavior. In the poem A Grammarian's Funeral, the speaker gives often a direction to the listeners. These poems show the difference between the speakers and the listeners. Like looking at the dramatic monologue, there will be only one speaker and the audience would have just to look and then listen to the dialogues. Browning's dramatic monologue provides an understanding of the character of the speaker. In the poem, Porphyria's Lover, we find a psychological makeup of the speaker. Psychological makeup. He is afraid that this moment of happiness, the moments of happiness, of love, will pass away. So he kills his beloved. Look at this. And then he suffers no more guilt of his actions. He does not feel bad anything about it. The lines, and all night long we have not stirred, and yet God had not said a word. So he ordered his wife to be killed, his beloved to be killed, and he's not feeling guilty. He says, God has not said any word. That means God has not punished him. God didn't say that it is a wrong deed, which shows that he's not guilty of himself. Look at this dialogue. The murder reminds us of the murder of the Duchess in the poem My Last Duchess. The lines in the poem My Last Duchess go like this. This grew, I gave command. What grew? This grew. The smiles grew. The smiles of the Duchess grew. So I gave command. Then all the smiles stopped together. So once and for all the smiles of the Duchess have stopped because he gave a command. In the poem Porphyria's Lover, this lover is not as cruel as the Duke. He just wants to get his beloved permanently. In Andrea del Sarto, we can see that a husband has excess fondness for his wife. His love for his wife destroys his career as an artist. Similarly, in the poem Fra Lippo Lippi, we find that there's a monk who is morally loose. Thus, all these dramatic monologues successfully concentrate on the personality of the speaker. There's a famous quote by Arthur Symons. He says about Browning that he is perhaps the greatest master in our language. He manages to strike a good tone to content ratio. Then it's not the reader that actually loves the crime. It is the narration. It is that what he narrates it so easily that the reader, in fact, will not be able to find whether the speaker has done anything wrong or not. As discussed already, he said because he didn't want to lose that moment of happiness which he enjoyed with his beloved, he killed his wife. He says, no pain felt she. I'm quite sure she felt no pain. Look at this. Realistic, a beautiful nature. It's a nature picture is another striking feature of Browning's dramatic monologues. These two are not taken from single country because he chose his characters from various ages and from various countries. All these people who he has selected as characters in the play are from different ages and from different countries. Similarly, he picked up his nature, the scenes and the landscapes in order to show as a background for human thought and human emotions. For example, the description of the lace heightens in the poem The Grammarian's Funeral, where the grammarian is to be buried. So the description of the lace is extraordinary. The speaker says in the poem, here is the man, here is the top peak, bury this man here. Here is the top peak, bury this man here, bury this man there. So look at those words. In the light of what we have discussed so far, we can easily say that Robert Browning is very successful in handling the form of dramatic monologue in his poems. Almost all the elements of a successful dramatic monologue are employed in his poems. Robert Browning's dramatic monologues are thoughtful and then they are confessional and at the same time self-revealing. Next, we look into the poem by John W.B. Yeats, The Second Coming. This is Yeats' most wonderful poems, The Second Coming. It is published in the year 1919, just a few years after the end of World War I. The poet in this poem presents a compelling alternative to the Christian concept of second coming. What is this second coming? It is anticipated that Jesus would come to earth, returns to earth as a savior, announcing that earth will be hereafter the kingdom of heaven. The first verse of the poem depicts a world filled with disorder, confusion. What is now going on? This world is full of disorder, confusion, and suffering. Rather than Jesus' heroic return, the second stanza imagines the speaker seeing a vision of the future, a bright future that shows the entrance of a monstrous beast. The Second Coming is one of Yeats' most quoted poems because of its excellent imagery and vivid descriptions of the society's impending breakdown. The second coming in this poem, Yeats shows the impact of theosophism on the title of his work. The poem suggests us that God appears on earth in various forms on regular basis according to Christianity. Additionally, the concept is inspired by Christ's mention of his rebirth. We all know that it is said, according to the Christian faith, that Jesus will be born again. So this is nothing but the second coming, and that is described in the New Testament of the Bible. The writer believed that an era which is made up of 2000 years and the beginning of each new cycle is marked by the birth of God manifesting in bodily form. He comes in bodily form. This idea can be found in his literary works such as A Vision. And then he also wrote the same thing in his work called Autobiographies. Even in the poems like Leather and Swan. As the Christian age draws to an end, we are given a vision of the Antichrist who will appear as a half man, half beast who looks like a hybrid creature. We can see the influence of St. John's vision of the beast. And then here comes the emergence of the second coming, which will bring about the seismic or else aesthetic shift in the global landscape. Yeats is preoccupied in this poem with a prophetic vision. He is seeing or having a vision of Christ coming back to the earth. We can see in the summary part that a falcon or a bird in a widening spiral can no longer hear the owner's call as it flies around in circles, a circle in a circle, a falcon or else a bird is moving in spiral. Things are falling apart and crumbling to the ground. There is devastation. There is no law. And all these have been sweeping across the globe like a blood-stained tidal wave. Everywhere there is suffering. Everywhere there is human suffering. Everywhere there is devastation. And there is no law for a happiness. This wave has been sweeping away all the rights of innocent people. When it comes to motivation, the best people tend to lack it. And the poorest of the poorest are fervent and eager. They would want to have a change. They would want to see a world which is of happiness. They would want to see in a world which is, where there is no suffering, where the people are happy, where the people are contented and satisfied with what they have. Some sort of revelation or the second coming must take place very soon. This is what the people are anxious to see. Now, the second coming is what has been explained in the poem. However, as soon as the poet or the speaker finishes saying this, a vision appears from the collective mind of the entire world. There is an uninhabited desert where there are no people at all, uninhabited, no people are living there. And then this desert where the speaker witnesses an animal head. He first witnesses or watches an animal head. Like the sun, it has an expression that is both empty and devoid of compassion. All around it, the speaker has learned something new. It is like a cradle that is shaking and has caused 2000 years of peace to be irrevocably shattered. When asked what beast is dragging itself to Bethlehem, the speaker replies, it's the beast whose time has finally come. So the poem ends here with a note that Christ is going to come. It's the beast whose time has finally come. So tells us that the beast will be going away very soon. The speaker in the second coming recounts humanity's increasing loss of control and predisposition towards violence and disorder. The poet is saying in the poem, The Second Coming, that everywhere there is no control, and then there is lots of violence and disorder with no law for appropriateness. But then the second coming, Christ will be coming, should come. It is to say that Christ would come. And this creates, like the disorderly life of the people, violence everywhere. All these create a terrifying apocalyptic scene. So the reader is bombarded with a surreal picture that create a frightening mood, as if the entire world is on the verge of exploding. There is no peace of mind on earth. Such is the thing that is taking place on earth at that particular moment of time. The message of the poem, The Second Coming, despite its metaphorical intricacy, is actually very, very clear. Basically, it is forecasting to us that humanity's time is up. It's time. And the society and everybody of us, we all know that it is about to be undone. A global calamity, destruction that actually has taken away the lives of more than 100 million people occurred shortly after Yeats wrote this poem. Considering this, it's not unexpected. Definitely, it is expected that the poem portrays humanity as hopeless and devoid of growth and order. With this in our mind, there is also, like we can see in the poem, that the first few sentences could be interpreted as a commentary on how disconnected people have been away from nature. They are destroying the trees, killing the animals, killing the mankind. So there is destruction everywhere. So there is no love for nature too. That too in the modern era. However, the falcon and the falconer metaphor has been shattered, and the human world now is in turmoil because of all this. As a result of 20 centuries, 20 centuries, so 2000 years of seemingly rising knowledge and scientific development, the first planet war showed that people are as capable of destructing everything. And that is what the poem says. Anarchy was loosed upon the world, along with blood splattering floods. Very clearly shows the mass death of war. For the intents and purposes, innocence was just a ceremony that had long since drowned. According to the speaker, the current state of the world, or else the globe, demonstrates that society's core, or else the roots, or else the foundation, was never really good or solid. The apparent progress of humanity had been a sham. Either way, modern society's promises about safety, security, human dignity, happiness, no violence, peace, all these have shown to be hollow. They couldn't be found. Thus, the second point, second coming, perversion of Christianity's second coming, in which Jesus Christ is meant to return to the earth and then invite true Christians into the heavens. He wanted to take them to the true heavens. When a rough beast, who is also called as Antichrist, appears, it's not Jesus. It's perhaps in the first stanza, we can see that it is nothing but the incessant noise everywhere because of the wars, tumult, destruction. There's warfare, use of weapons, violence everywhere, bloodshed. All these are everywhere. Then it is expected that the second coming, or else the return of Jesus, is going to take place. After 2000 years, the poem concludes with the last vision of the beast, wherein the poet tells us that despite appearances, mankind have been sowing the seeds of its own doom. What we do, so we reap. I mean to say, what we sow as the seeds, the same crop comes up. Whatever our deeds are, so we reap. While walking near Jesus' birthplace, this rough beast is slouching pitilessly in preparation for the coming of darkness and nightmare. Christian morality is questioned in the second coming. From the very beginning, the poem alludes to the biblical book of Revelation. Jesus returns to earth to save the righteous, to save the good people. A time of all out conflict, devastation, hatred, all these negatives would be removed. These are predicted by the Bible when humanity reaches the end of the road, because humanity has lost its moral sense. Perhaps this moral sense was an illusion to begin with. The poem indicates that the time ends, and at this end, we have almost reached, as the poet says, obviously, it's the time that Jesus would come to the earth. This is what is mentioned in the second coming. Now, looking at certain important points, like the poem is incredibly enigmatic. The poem was published when Yeats made numerous revisions to remove cultural allusions. However, it's clear that this is a pessimistic outlook. Yes, we all have to be, yes, we know that there is destruction everywhere, but then also at the same time, there should be a hope for us that, yes, that Jesus is going to come and then save the humanity, save the people. Thus, this pessimistic outlook on humanity's future, one in which morality is presented as a kind of communal fantasy, which is now actually becoming a nightmare. Now, let's look into the last poem for the day, T.S. Eliot's work. T.S. Eliot, who lived from 1888 to 1965, was a major literary critic of the day. He was a remarkable poet, playwright, and a critic who demonstrated his versatility as a creative genius. There were other poets like Dryden, Johnson, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Matthew Arnold, who have come even before him, and including Sir Philip Sidney also. But then he had left a significant impact on the development of literary aspects. Eliot made English literary criticism look different from other aspects. According to George Watson, what he says is that he had made it quite different, distinct, not one in a straightforward sense. There is poetic drama, criticism, similar to earlier poets, but then he also was the one who had his innovative perspectives. He has a lot to say, according to John Hayward. T.S. Eliot wrote few works that have become very famous, such as The Love Song of Alfred Prufrock, which came out in the year 1915. He also was the writer of the work The Wasteland, and then that was published in the year 1922. Coming to this poem, Eliot's focus, we'll have to talk about this anyhow. Eliot's focus shifted from literature to other aspects of culture. The function of criticism, tradition and individual talent, poetry and drama, the English metaphysical poets, the frontiers of criticism are said to be some of the best articles that are written about criticism by him. In this work, named The Journey of Magi, M-A-G-I, Magi, this is how the pronunciation is made. In this work, the poet discusses about wise men traveling to Bethlehem. Why are they going? To see Jesus Christ, to see Jesus' birth. The narrator of the Magi, whose account is split into 3 stanzas, talks about three important things. It is the journey to the birthplace, and it is the arrival of the prefiguring and satisfaction. And the third is the reflection and acknowledgement of a new faith. None of these things appear to have anything to do with Jesus. These Magi aren't astrologers from Persia, nor they're coming to greet the Savior. Rather, the focus is on the path of action, the internal and external travels that a human being would make in order to experience spiritual rebirth. According to the poem, the episode of the true birth that is witnessed by the Magi comes after the main topic of translation. The poem was composed in the year 1927, according to the poem's author, who is T.S. Eliot, who was going through a pivotal time in his life at that particular point of time. T.S. Eliot says, I had been thinking about in church, and when I poured myself a drink, I began to write. The poetry and half bottle of gin was both finished by the lunchtime. We can understand how he must have written this poem. The subject content of the poem, The Journey of the Magi, comes directly from the Bible. It's loaded with religious and spiritual overtones. At the time of Christ's birth in Palestine, three wise men traveled from the east, arriving in a highly logical manner. The wise men set out in a bitter cold of winter and on their journey to the birthplace of Jesus Christ, where they presented him with gifts. During the course of their pilgrimage, they encountered severe difficulties, countless difficulties and suffering. Whatever be the case, they continued on their way through the night without stopping. They were stranded without access and without having any water, without food, or without shelter. They just went on and on. Their camels were exhausted from the long journey, and that too it was bitter cold. It's also clever and imaginative to consider the notion of them that they have been entertained by gorgeous young females who had actually vanished by them. Again, it is heartbreaking to see people on the way refusing to cooperate with them. Nobody has helped them out. There were cunning men and who have given no assistance. They were antagonistic as well as unpleasant towards these three people. This shows how short-sighted those people were about the historical significance of the birth of Jesus Christ and his life and work. They came upon a nice valley. It was full of natural beauty and lush greenery. And this actually erased all their, suffering and the pains. They are now relieved from some of their travel weakness and tiresomeness. As a result, it demonstrates that T.S. Eliot was also a nature poet because he's talking all about nature now. The Magi enjoyed the sounds of the running stream, the water mills, as well as the smell of the surrounding scenery and the greenery. In addition, the image of the ancient white horse galloping through the field shows as a perfect metaphor for the relationship between the horse and the rider. The horse and the rider, remember these two terms. The Magi now make it to a pub. And then there were 6 patrons who were too busy gambling to aid them. The Magi, on the other hand, keep going and eventually arrive at their destination. Now, the poet seems to be emphasizing or focusing how unique Jesus Christ's birth and death were in comparison to those of ordinary men. When he was born, it was like death for the human species, since it was long and grueling and agonizing process. He was crucified in order to free mankind from slavery and free mankind from their sins. As Jesus Christ was crucified close to the 3 trees, their depiction in the low sky depicts his death in the future. Eliot feels relieved and grateful for the qualities of Jesus Christ. His strange death is described in his poem. The poem uses very precise wording. As an artist, the poet has accomplished and achieved a great deal, and the poem contains lots of symbolism and spiritual content. There's an extended metaphor in the poem, The Journey of the Magi. The poem is on the spiritual journey in which the physical body is still craving for carnal wants. There are objective correlates of the spiritual insights of the journey. The pilgrimage is nothing but the realm of humanity or the journey, realm of humanity to the kingdom of heaven. It actually leads of the journey details, it actually gives or else leads to the death of the old materialism, and it paves the way for the birth of new spiritual self. In the details about the journey of the Magi from the far east bound for Jerusalem to pay their respect and homage to the child or else newly born Jesus Christ in Jerusalem. Symbolically, the Magi represent several stages of the spiritual path. When one of them recalls their mission, he longs for their indulgence in hedonistic pleasure. Tormented by its absence, he claims that on their way to Emmaus, they felt drawn to sensual pleasures. At this critical juncture, they regretted not following the Spirit's summons. The person on the outlook does the long journey. It goes on through the night and in the early hours of the morning. The surroundings are idyllic. He is in a temperate valley. Now they have arrived at the beginning of spiritual delight. There's a flowing stream that illustrates the musical flow of life. There's watermill beating the darkness that actually denotes the dissolving of uncertainty. At this point, the person on the hunt, that is, as we have already spoken about the two words, the rider and the horse. So it discovers that the man of faith has been unfaithful due to the efforts of people who lack faith. It's important to note that we need to have faith in Jesus Christ. He sees three crosses on Golgotha, one for Jesus Christ and the other two for the male factors in this spiritual realm. He also sees Jesus Christ riding a white horse, and we can see through the eyes of the poet, or else in the lyrics of the poem, Judas betraying Jesus Christ for 30 pieces of silver. Romans were playing a dice game for Jesus Christ's garments after the crucifixion. For a moment, the memories of the sins of these men occupy his thoughts. In addition, the poet realized that the secret to his quest, his thirst, had not been revealed to him until now. So he continued his search even in future, in earnest desire. After a long journey, he finally arrives at a point where he can see the rest of the realm. He is now happy and contented with his accomplishments. The positive outcome of this poem, The Journey to the Magi, is the affirmation of the belief that it is important to see the victory over one's carnal nature in order to undergo spiritual transformation. One has to reach to the heights of the spiritual transformation. To have that, it's important to remove all our materialistic desires. The journey or the story of the Magi's journey is straightly taken away from the New Testament. In the journey of the Magi, the poet, in fact, writes this poem and takes the source from the Bible, that is from the New Testament. According to one of the Magi, it was hard and cruel torture for them to witness the birth of Jesus Christ. And then, because of the transition from the old to the new, is something like traveling that is from fraught with grief. The new birth does not, in fact, bring complete joy. What makes Eliot's poem so powerful? It is that he makes one of the Magi the speaker. One of the Magi is the speaker, and he turns the narrative into psycho-spiritual journey, typical of the pilgrim, and it is interwoven with that of religious teacher. So he is not simply a narrator, he is also the one who has turned the narrative into psycho-spiritual journey. The theme of the poem is nothing but the effect of spiritual event on individual identity and society. There is nothing important than the process of renewal. It's the journey of human psyche through history. So the journey of the Magi is nothing but, traveling from materialism towards spirituality. So here we end our session and we'll be meeting tomorrow with the new poems.